All right, we're rolling.
All right.
Hey, buddy, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Awesome. Listen, thanks for doing this.
Yeah, of
Really
course.
kind of excited to talk to you.
hmm
Um, and it's funny. Other than your Reddit name, I didn't actually know your name until right now. It's Dean?
Yeah.
Yeah. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
I'm
Yeah.
John.
Nice to meet
So,
you. Yeah.
why don't you just take a minute and
hmm
tell everybody who you are and what you do?
Yeah. Yeah. So my name is Dean. I work for the Youth Authority in the state where I live, and I work at the largest youth correctional facility in the state.
Do you want to give me the
Recently, I
state?
mean, I'm still Oregon.
Oregon. Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, Oregon Youth Authority. I'm still in training. It's a lot of training, but I've done quite a bit of, on-site training and shadowing. So I've been there in the facility, been on my unit, met the kids there, and already seen how things go. So,
So, how many kids are on the unit?
all right. So it depends on the unit. Um, in theory, no more than 16.
Okay.
But it doesn't always work out that way. And especially for me, I work on one of the intake units. We have three intake units altogether. And every youth in I'm sorry, what's the word I'm looking for? I guess I'll just say under the care of the youth authority, they all come to my facility first, go through intake, and then many of them stay because, again, it's the largest facility. Others get sent to other facilities around the state. But they're on the intake unit for about 30 to 45 days. So numbers change a lot. Just the other day, we had 18, and then two of them went to their permanent unit, and we were back down to our normal numbers. So
How long?
units,
No, go ahead. Finish up.
I was going to say other units, when they, are on their permanent unit, sometimes they'll be over 16 also. And that's just the way it is. We can't control the number of youth that come into our facility, of course. So
Obviously, yeah.
yeah.
How long? You mentioned that you were still in training, but how long have you been there?
So this is my fourth week of training.
Okay.
We did one week of training at we just call it the academy. It's in the same building as the police academy, but different training. And then 2 weeks I did on site.
Okay.
And then so I think I said already, this is my fourth week of training.
So what did you do before this?
I was a preschool teacher.
A preschool
And
teacher.
I
Okay.
keep telling people it's a lot more similar than you'd expect.
I buy that. I buy that.
Yeah. About half the people do. Half the people are like, "What the fuck are you talking about?" So, yeah.
No,
But
I totally get it.
Yeah, and my job specifically, it's called Group Life Coordinator. And our first and biggest duty is supervision for safety and everything. But we're also just like in a preschool, working with teaching these kids basic life skills. Plus, what we're doing with the youth authority also, because a lot of the youth coming through, even though they're older, they don't have those basic life skills yet. So they're just, they can hurt you more when they hit you. That's the youth authority. So, yeah.
So you are on site in, I guess it's not technically a prison, right? The facility, we'll say.
Yeah, that's fine. Because, even at least in the state of Oregon, the prisons are also called correctional facility.
Right.
But if you walk into the living unit, it's not what you'd expect walking to a prison, that's for sure. And there's obviously a reason we do that. So I always refer to it as the facility. Yeah, because we're not here to punish the youth. That's not the point. The point is not to just make them do their time. The point is to reduce the rate of reoffense.
Right.
And we do that. And this facility, let's see, 1892, I think is when it originally opened. So the facility has a long time to learn what works and doesn't work. And constantly, from what I can tell at least, constantly moving in a new directions, moving in a new direction now, and the old staff don't always like it so much, but always trying to do what we can and what we have found to reduce the rate of reoffense.
Okay. I have a lot of questions. Yeah. So I don't know if I had mentioned, but I worked for a little over a year in a corrections facility as a substance abuse counselor. Okay. So when you said that you were like a youth, whatever, that you did kind of the same thing that I did. That's how I processed it. I'm kind of dumb sometimes. Don't worry about me.
You're good.
I was really kind of excited to talk to you because I want to know, you've already said a couple of things that interest me. So tell me about the facility itself.
It's huge, for one thing. I wish I could remember how many acres big it is, but I mean, it's the security, for lack of a better word, they're called campus operations. They drive cars around the facility because it's so big you just can't get from one side to the other fast enough. And if you run, you're going to be out of breath, and you're not going to be able to help out by the time you get to an emergency. It's surrounded by a giant fence. That fence was built in 1997. Because for a long time, if a youth starts running off, they really have nowhere to go. But the city has grown around it, really. Just on the other side of the fence in one spot is an apartment building now. But there's a giant fence, but you go in through the gatehouse. There's two different sections of living units. We call them the courtyard and the valley. I work on the courtyard. So I'll speak to that because I know that a lot better. You go into the living unit, and in like the center of the living unit, we call it the day room. There are tables where the youth will eat their meals. There are tables they play chess. They play a lot of chess, which I didn't expect, but that's pretty cool. There's TVs at the end. Now, of course, the staff, if we decide the TVs turn off, the TVs are going to turn off, but they can watch TV during certain hours of the day. And in my unit on the courtyard, they each have their own room. There's an outdoor patio area that's, I don't like calling it a cage, but it's basically caged in so they can have, they be outside in the fresh air, but still be locked within the living unit.
Right. Oh, so that's like within the living unit? Is there a bigger like courtyard area?
Yes. Yeah. So then typically 2 hours a day they get outdoor rec.
2 hours.
That can change. Okay. Typically. Well, I think. So the last week, well, let me explain this first. There's a school there in the facility. It is a accredited high school with the local school district.
Oh, wow.
Teachers,
that in and of itself is a huge step in the right direction.
It's great. I don't know how long the school has been there, but it's really great. Teachers will come in, from the community. They're just, I don't like using the word like normal or regular, but, mainstream. They're mainstream teachers.
They're civvies.
Got their degree. Typically do their a student teaching either in this facility or something similar. And they have school year round. The youth can get their high school degree in 2.5 years if they do what they're supposed to. But last week while I was there, they didn't have school. It was like a spring break for them, but at the end of summer. And so to answer your question, last week was 2 hours of outdoor rec per day. When school is running, it might just be 1 hour, but they get at least an hour of outdoor rec. And then they have gyms. There's 2 gyms on the facility that are like school gyms. In fact, one of them is used for gym class as part of the school. And then there's another one that is a weightlifting gym. I guess a local gym shut down and donated all their weight machines to the youth authority, which is super cool. To continue talking about the facility itself, the youth can have jobs on the facility. The living unit itself has a kitchen and a laundry room, and there can be one youth working in each of those places, which they get paid for.
Mm.
We have one thing that's super cool is a dog rescue. They rescue dogs, bring them onto the facility. The youth help train them, and then people come in to the facility to adopt dogs.
That okay. So I want to ask you about the visual aesthetic inside the prison.
Okay.
Because one of the first things that struck me when I walked into where I was working was that it felt like the marble tile floors and the the bare concrete walls reminded me a lot of like middle school.
Yeah.
And I mean, of course, much more depressing than that, but it was like the same, I don't know, the same thing. Just I couldn't help but feel a sense of like there's something not efficient about this if your aim is to rehabilitate people.
Exactly. Yeah, of course.
And I've heard reports of like prisons from other parts of the world where they take a more they're more aware of the aesthetics of the prison.
Yep.
And so you being out on the West Coast, if any place is gonna have pretty prison, then I think it's probably like Oregon.
Yeah. Now,
somewhere out there.
Of course, I cannot speak for the Department of Justice, which is our adult system. But what I will say is the Youth Authority has done a great job of making it aesthetically pleasing. I mean, the living units are their home for as long as they're there. And we like to treat it as such as much as we possibly can. Now, I will say that a lot of the buildings were built in the 1950s, the ones that are currently standing. The living units, the side that I'm working on, these are new units that are built in 2017.
Okay.
So
relatively recently.
Yeah. The old units are in the process of being renovated. So they're pretty nice. I mean, on my unit, it is concrete floors, but the walls are brick, like what you see in a school, for sure. But they're painted. There's like murals on the wall. There's all these quotes on the wall, and they crack me up because they're like good quotes about, owning your actions and making yourself better for it. But they write in the font of like something I would expect to see on my aunt's wall as she sips her wine or something. It just cracks me up. It's really funny. But yeah, there's we have our counselor essentially, who there's one on each living unit. In my unit, she let the youth at some point.
Wait, hold on, back up just for a second.
Yep.
Did you say she's living on the unit?
No, she works in the living unit.
Works in the living unit. Okay.
Yeah. So,
right.
It's a 9 to 5 job.
It was about to be a whole lot different if she was living there.
Yeah. But there's one per unit. And then there's other, I know we have one who specifically works with the sexual offenders. So I don't know if there's others in addition to one per unit, but there's at least the one who works with the sex offenders. But yeah, so our Q is what we call her, because there's so many acronyms for everything. But she let the youth at one point draw on the windows, draw murals with whatever, window paint. So there's art from former youth from the living unit on there. So that's all to say the living units are very homey, which again is the purpose, because just locking someone up in a prison doesn't rehabilitate anyone.
Right.
Yeah. As far as other buildings, they're old. Maybe more what you'd expect from a state building that the public isn't going into, but I think they put special care into the living units, which is good.
Yeah. So can you describe the sense of so you said each of the youths on the unit have their own room.
In
Right.
certain units, anyway. In mine, they do.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So specifically in yours,
Okay.
what's the vibe or what's the sense that you get, from
From the
the
rooms.
room? Yeah.
So the rooms themselves are maybe a bit more prison-like.
Mm.
Their beds are like mats. They're not actually mattresses.
Okay.
And keep in mind, this is the intake unit, so they're not
Okay. So
having a lot of personal items yet.
Right. Because
On other units, they can buy their own clothes. Obviously, someone has to approve it, but yeah, they wear their own clothes. They buy their own stuff, and their stuff gets searched all the time, of course. But
obviously,
I didn't know that. I just assumed they all wore what they were on my unit, but it turns out that's not true. But yeah, then there's like a few shelves and a desk with a chair, and that's it. So I imagine on other units, the rooms might be a bit more personalized, maybe also a bit more homey because they can buy items. But yeah, that's the one I would say, at least on my unit, that's the part that's a little drab, a little dreary. So.
How much do you know about like the prison itself and the philosophy? I know you're like brand new, so and these aren't exactly softball questions, so but they are what they are because
yeah.
So shit. No, hold on. Okay, so that's what it was. It was like how much do you know about the philosophy that the organization or the prison takes to rehabilitation? And really, I'll just cut to the chase. Is like, do you know if it's based on models outside of the U.S.?
I don't know if it's based on any other models. I don't think it is. As far as I can tell, it's based on the experience of the people in the facility, youth and staff alike. But I certainly can't speak to what their philosophy is. I mean, there's been a lot of talk of it because it's been changing more recently. I'll start with this. So I can tell, I'm meeting a lot of the staff every day. It seems like I meet new people, and I can always tell who likes the old system better and who likes the direction we're going better.
Sure.
The people who like the old system refer to it as corrections or corrections-based. Well, it still is corrections. It's a correctional facility.
Yeah.
And the people who like the direction we're going now refer to the old way as compliance-based. And that's really what it was. That's really what it was. It was
exactly.
Sit down, shut up, and follow the rules.
Yep.
But we're moving into a more therapeutic approach, or I should say have moved into a more therapeutic approach. It's just some of the old staff are resistant. And I get it. You've done something. Some of those staff have been here for 20, 30 years. You do something for that long, it is hard to change. But we're supposed to be building rapport with these youth, building relationships with these youth as kind of as mentors, teaching them, for one thing, like I said, teaching them these basic life skills, teaching them how to process their emotions because they didn't learn that growing up.
Right.
Things like that. And how to deal with anger and trauma and all these things, as opposed to just learning how to follow the rules. Because if you teach them to follow the rules, that's great when there's someone there 24 hours a day telling them what to do. And then they get back out in the real world and there's no one there telling them what to do all day long. So teaching them not just the basic life skills, but the higher executive functioning as well. And teaching them how to make rational decisions and deal with their anger, and teaching them why they need to follow the rules, which seems so obvious to most people, but when you look at the way these kids grew up, they genuinely don't know.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So that's really the
way it's going. They're like basically always in survival mode.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not basically, literally.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yep.
Yeah, I think that's
So I've been
one
very
of the things that people don't realize about this population is that the vast majority of them are literally in survival mode from the day that they're born. You know.
yeah. Many of them are born addicted to drugs.
Happens,
So
yeah.
I worked in a rehab facility for a while as well. So
Okay.
yeah, that one was I left because the management was just awful, but learned a lot about the rehabilitate or what's the word I'm looking for?
The
The drug rehab. It is rehabilitation.
yeah, the rehab.
This is rehab.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
No,
rehab.
it does sound weird because when you say rehabilitation, usually you're referring to corrections
A
or
prison.
prison.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and then
yeah, yeah.
rehab is for
But
drugs and alcohol. That's
rehab,
why. Yeah,
like the
yeah,
truncated rehab is for drugs.
yeah,
So
yeah.
that's a good point, actually.
But yeah, and I think that I didn't expect to work for the youth authority until days before I had the interview. I happened to see the job post and I thought, oh, that looks really cool, and I applied. But I think working in the rehab facility really prepared me for a lot of what I've seen at the corrections facility.
So in the rehab facility, was it? Did you guys use MAT or was it just?
Okay, here's the thing about the rehab facility. It was a facility for pregnant and parenting women.
Okay.
And we had so they had many of them had their children there in the, what do we call it, unit, I guess, in the unit with them. And we had an in-house daycare, and I worked in the daycare.
Gotcha.
So my training and my experience was more around trauma-informed care, which again, very helpful.
Yes.
But trauma-informed care, as well as things like, what we were just talking about, like fetal alcohol syndrome. So I couldn't tell you what the counselors were doing, honestly, or like what they were operating under, at least.
So it seemed like nobody kind of knew what they were doing.
No, they knew what they were doing. I just didn't know what they were doing because the daycare was a whole different world from the rest of the unit.
I see.
Yeah.
So you were kind of removed from the other aspect of it because of just by virtue of where you were. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. Yep. And that was a private healthcare company. And it is in large part because of that I would never ever. Well, I shouldn't say in large part because I probably wouldn't have done this anyway. But in part, why I would never ever work for a private prison.
A private.
Now my thing is
private prison.
Yeah. My thing is, long before that, I was already against the idea of a private prison at all. But Oregon state law does not allow for private prisons. It's all state run. So.
Yeah, I'm not even sure which is better in that sense.
As far as, like a rehab facility, I think a lot of private healthcare companies are going to do just fine. And in fact, it's
so hard though, man. Like with this specifically, it's so hard to say because anytime profit is introduced, when people's like livelihood and when their health.
See, that's the issue.
Oh God,
and
it's so squirrely.
Well, get this. My psychiatrist at the time when I was working at the rehab place, she was a former employee of the same company. Before moving into a different practice, and she told me the same thing that a few other people would tell me later on, which is that the company was really great, really wonderful until they started promoting people based on essentially nepotism. Promote their good buddies up to the higher offices, and then the whole thing just went so far downhill. In fact, my psychiatrist, she diagnosed me with ADHD. I went my whole childhood not knowing, although it makes a lot of sense now looking back. But I requested some very basic, very easy accommodations from her. Well, so my psychiatrist wrote the letter that I sent off to HR. HR denied my accommodations, and I went back to my psychiatrist and I said, they denied my accommodations, even though they're so easy. And I said the name of the head of HR. I spoke about her by name. I won't say her name here, but my psychiatrist said, oh, she's still head of HR. She hates me. And my psychiatrist even thinks that that's why my accommodations were denied. So this is what we're working with. Yeah. And everyone hated head of HR. So even other HR employees. But it was, so it was bad. I worked there for about a year and I couldn't handle it anymore. My own mental health was going down the drain.
Sure.
So I left and actually ended up going back to my old job, but was able to do full time, and my life got better. So I definitely see where profit and the whole corporate mindset is no good. I've been to lots of doctors' offices and companies that I thought were great, but they can turn so quickly. So you're right. I think it is kind of a hard question to answer.
I think that there's it's like if you start a prison because you want to make money,
right,
then there's something wrong with you.
And I don't see any other reason why someone would start a for-profit prison. And so when it comes to prisons themselves,
so I would push back on that personally.
Right?
Like, I personally would consider starting a for-profit prison, given if the for-profit model is actually more profitable than the non-profit model. I don't know, right?
Right.
But I would consider doing that because I know what I want to accomplish. So I'm not starting it to make a profit. I'm starting it because I have something that I want to build, right? In this thing specifically. So the fact that there actually is an avenue for me to set up something that I can turn a profit from and then immediately reinvest into the project that I want. That's why I say it's kind of like, but most people aren't me. Yeah. Most people aren't going to do that.
Right. And that I can see happening. I guess in my mind, I went straight to, if someone were to do that, it would be nonprofit. But you make a good point that you can turn that profit around and help run it the way you want it. So, and I suspect that's what happened with the company I used to work for in the beginning. Because like I said, by all accounts in the beginning, it was great. I spoke to people who I met who went through the program and had nothing but good things to say. And then I found out they finished their time with the company before all these changes happened. So, yeah. But then, I can also understand why a lot of people would say, well, the state's not going to do a whole lot better. Like, I can see where people would come from saying that. And because I didn't know what to expect when I started working with the youth authority. And I very intentionally didn't know what to expect because I didn't want to form expectations in my mind and find that they weren't true. But I wouldn't agree with people saying the state's not going to do much better, but I could see why people might respond with that too. If that makes sense. I don't feel like
no, it does. It does. And it's a valid argument. Like,
yeah.
I mean, like I said, I was at the prison for over a year, just over a year. And like, if that's the best that the state can do, then, we got to figure something else out. Like, really is what it is. Really is what we have to figure
I
something else
out. If you look into the history of my facility, there was a time where it was very bad. There have been lots of lawsuits, some of which, well, at least one that I know of was lost by the youth authority, or it wasn't called the Youth Authority yet, but it was very bad. But if they're willing to make the changes and improve things, then that's, at the very least, a step in the right direction. And then fast forward to today, there's really the only thing I've seen so far, and granted I'm very new, but the only thing I've seen so far that I've been disappointed by is staff relations with each other. And that's going to happen anytime you get more than a few people in a room together. So yeah, I've been very impressed. Again, I can't speak to the adult system, Department of Justice, but
well, the fact that they have a high school like built in, I think says a lot about the facility.
You know what else they do is those who have graduated high school can take college courses there at the facility.
That is awesome.
Yeah. We got ones, I shared a little bit about the jobs they can do around the facility. There's others as well. And then another thing they do is there's a lot of them that leave the facility with their certification to be a drug and alcohol counselor themselves.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, thank God it's happening somewhere.
I know. And yeah, like I said, I was very intentional about trying not to form assumptions or expectations, but I think even if I had, it still would have exceeded my expectations. So
that's awesome.
And it's not, yeah, it is. And of course it's not perfect. We still get kids coming back on parole violations.
Yeah.
There's still, kids get hurt at the hands of staff sometimes when the staff didn't respond appropriately, but not like what I would have expected. You know what I mean? So.
All right. Cool. So we are officially streaming live on YouTube.
Cool.
I'm not going to make you reintroduce yourself. That's weird. They weren't here for the first part. That's on them.
Yeah.
So we were talking a bit before the break about your career and working in the prison. Had you had any experience with prisons before this, or
Nope.
Like I know you said you were very careful about managing your expectations on this, so I was interested in that. And being that you're still pretty new, I'd really like to get your opinion after you've been there for a little while. One of the things that was most frustrating for me was that the staff never really got along.
Yeah.
There were always rifts between us as a clinical staff, like within our clinical staff itself, our administrative staff, and then the correctional staff as well. And so what I did find particularly fascinating, though, is that so the way our unit was set up, we were in charge of one unit that housed up to, it was like 70 guys that we had.
Oh, wow.
So it was a pretty big unit. It was like 2-story, like double-decker kind of thing. But the whole thing was open. And so you had like your bunks there, you had the showers there, you had the lunch tables there, you had the TV over off in the corner. And so we would also like run groups there, but everything was open.
Yep.
So
So here's what I'll say about staff relations. I've already seen quite a bit of it. So they have us, last week what we did is our shadow shifts, they called them. And they wanted us to shadow all 3 shifts, which would be morning, swing, and graveyard. But they only made us stay for a few hours graveyard instead of all night, 10 to 6. But on my unit, day shift gets along with each other.
Mhm.
Swing shift gets along with each other. But day shift and swing shift hate each other.
Okay, so there's like animosity like between the two shifts.
Between the two shifts, and nearly everyone hates the living unit manager. I shouldn't say hate, I mean they dislike. Hate is maybe too strong of a word, and it's all, at least as far as I can tell, it's all related to work and nothing really personal. The living unit manager is supports the new direction that we're going, and a lot of them, because this is one of the best units to work on, is what I've been told directly, and is what I can tell from the stories that I've heard from other units. And that's, you know, in large part because it's the intake unit and the youth are still afraid. You know what I mean? So they're not going to tell you to go fuck off nearly as much as on other units.
Yeah.
But so a lot of the staff have been there for a long time and prefer the old way of doing things. So they don't like the living unit manager too much. Day shift and swing shift don't like each other too much. However, in every instance that I've seen so far, they present a total united front for the youth.
That's important.
So even if
important.
Even if one of this, so my role is called GLC. I can't remember if I mentioned that, group life coordinator. If the GLCs don't like a decision that the living unit manager makes in front of the youth, they will not say a word until that LUM is living unit manager, until the LUM is back in his office, and they'll go in there and talk about it in private. And that's critical. And so I'm really happy with how that has played out, at least so far. And I very much know that I haven't seen everything yet. I mean, I haven't seen a fight break out on the unit yet.
Right.
But I know that's going to happen plenty of times. So.
You know, it's interesting. I don't think I actually saw any fights break out on our unit in the entire time I was there. It happened a lot in the facility, just never on our unit.
See, it's happened on my unit when I was.
It's already happened. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I was just with, because they don't have to go outside for outside rec. In fact, some of them will be CTF, which means confined to floor, and they cannot leave the living unit for any reason other than medical, pretty much.
Right.
So I'll see it happen, and there's a lot that I'll see happen that I haven't seen happen yet. But my hope is that through all of it, the staff will continue to present a united front, because that is quite possibly the most important thing.
Yeah. And that was the thing that I don't think we ever really got right. You know, like one of us would say, like, we're gonna do this, and this, and you know, we're gonna give out so. When I was there, we were trying to get away from the like the I guess the punishment approach to things, and focus more on cognitive accountability kinds of things. And like the old staff didn't like that. Yeah. They're like, no, it's always been. And our trainer for the state was like, how does it make sense? Okay, listen, how does it make sense that if you're disrespectful to the officer on duty, that you have to go and clean the bathrooms for 3 days? It's like, it doesn't really make sense. Like the two don't line up. Like it would be much better to work with that person to get them to write an apology of their own and then deliver it publicly.
Yeah.
Right. That would be a much better way to hold them accountable for their actions. Because, and that, like, it always made a lot of sense to me. But the older staff there were not having it. They were like, no, you can't.
Sounds very similar to my situation. Yeah. And one thing that we're having right now is a lot of staff quit during COVID. like a lot. I mean, we're very understaffed. Um, but what that means is that the new staff coming in, we're not stuck in the old ways. And so
Right.
a large part of it very well may end up as a blessing in disguise.
Hmm. I hope so.
I hope so too.
Like I said,
Yeah.
I'd be really interested to talk to you in even just a couple
Mm-hmm.
of months.
Yeah.
One of the things that I thought was particularly fascinating is the way that like that environment compresses time. Um,
Mm-hmm.
it it I don't know if you've been there long enough to really get a sense for that, but it does, like, at least for me, it did weird things with
Mm-hmm.
time. So it was it was a little bit like being in the hyperbolic time chamber
Mm-hmm.
for me. Like it felt like I developed certain skills incredibly quickly because of the
Mm-hmm.
environment, as
Mm-hmm.
if like I had spent more time working on them than I actually had.
Yeah.
So, um,
Yeah.
now I'm thinking about it. So, what do you see happening with this? Where do you see it going?
Like career wise,
Career wise, yeah.
uh,
And that, I mean, maybe if you want to extrapolate too, and think about where the system itself, or the philosophy, what you know so far about it itself.
all right. Well, I'll answer the career part of it first. I kind of expected to work this job for a few years and then move on to other things. And who knows
Hmm.
how I'll feel in a few years, but right now I'm really enjoying this job, probably more than I've enjoyed any other job in the
Hmm.
past. And thinking, because my thought was I work here for a few years and then move to the Oregon coast. Because ever since I was, uh, okay, as long as I can remember, I've wanted to live at the Oregon coast.
Hmm.
I love it there. Well, I found out recently there are 3 different youth authority locations on the Oregon coast. There's another correctional facility, as well as 2 transitional, they call them camp, but they like transitional programs. So
Hmm.
kids who have left well, I mean, a lot of them are probably adults by the time they actually leave because youth authority, we have the youth can be anywhere from 12 to 25. Well, 12 to 24, I guess, because when they
Hmm.
turn 25, they move on to DOJ. If they commit their offense after 18, they're in the DOJ the whole time. But if they are
I see.
housed
I
in a
see. Yeah.
facility
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
before 18, they stay. If they leave, they're under the parole officer through the youth authority, and if they break parole, they're still with the youth authority. So I think the transitional programs are probably mostly adults, but now I have to consider and very strongly consider working in one of the programs on the coast eventually. The other thing that I, really like to do with my life is have a career in music. I come from a long line of musicians in my family, and
Okay.
I have a penchant for writing music. I typically use the word composing music, but I don't ever want anyone to think that means I write classical music, because I don't.
Sure.
But I'm also not like, I don't sing, I don't write lyrics. What I would love to do is write soundtracks for movies or video games.
Hmm.
I really like
That's
working
what.
for the youth authority. So we'll see. We'll see what ends up happening. I really don't know. Um,
So do you play instruments?
Not well. I mean, if you ask me what instrument I can play, I would say piano, guitar, bass guitar, ukulele. I was taking fiddle lessons for a while, but I had to stop those. Um, like I have my keyboard behind me. I don't know if you can see it,
Oh, nice.
maybe
Yeah.
a little bit. Um, but if you if someone comes to my apartment and they see that and ask about it, what I'm going to tell them is I'm not a pianist. I'm not a keyboardist. That is there to help me compose music. Mostly, I can play like 3 songs. But that, not only can I use it to write melodies and chord progressions, but I can plug it into my computer and use it as a MIDI controller, if you know what that means.
Vaguely, yeah.
Vaguely, yeah. The one instrument that I would say like I do play is bass guitar. I'm a bassist.
Oh, that's
more than anything else.
That's
yeah.
what's up.
Yeah.
So,
but yeah, so that's career wise. Maybe, I don't know, maybe eventually I'll work part time for the Youth Authority and part time writing music. We'll see. As far as the department meaning like the entire Youth Authority.
mm-hmm.
It's hard to say what the future holds. I mean, it seems like things change relatively quickly in recent decades. And this is by all, I mean, I've met people who worked in the Youth Authority in the 80s until, relatively, I spoke to someone recently who worked in the 80s and then retired somewhat recently and said that 30-ish years saw tremendous change for the better. So my hope is that will continue.
Yeah. But I mean, it's better than some of the stuff I heard. Yeah.
Yeah. Things often is 1 step or 2 steps forward, 1 step back. You know what I mean? Yeah. So it's hard to tell. But, compare it to, well, even before they built the fence, I've heard stories because kids would run. And like I said, they're not going to get very far because they can't, at that point, they wouldn't be able to run into town.
Right.
So what they do is the CO, campus operations, would drive a car, get up next to them, and then open the door as hard as they could to knock the kid over to stop them from running. And that's what you got to do. You know what I mean? That's better than them running into the forest, and then what are they going to do?
Right.
But it's a lot better to have a fence. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah.
It's a lot better to not throw kids in isolation just as they flip you off. So for a lot of stories, that too, kids would get thrown into isolation for behavioral issues, and that doesn't happen anymore.
Wow.
They get put into, it's called IU intervention unit. And this, from the sounds of it, is within the last like 5 or 6 years. But the only reason they can go to intervention unit for, we call it a timeout, which is hilarious because again, very similar to preschool.
Yeah.
But they can do that, just kind of cool off, calm down. But if they're going to be in IU with about 2 exceptions, if they're going to be there overnight, it's for a behavior issue.
Okay.
I'm sorry, not a behavior issue. If they're going to be there overnight, with 2 exceptions that I know of, it is because they are an immediate threat to themselves or others. The 2 exceptions are, 1, sometimes there's no room for them to sleep on the unit, and they have to sleep in a IU room, and then in the morning they come back to the unit. The other reason is sometimes they don't want to leave. They're too afraid to go back to their unit because there is a social hierarchy amongst the youth in every unit. And there is a culture unique to every unit, and sometimes they don't want to go back. So we call that a refusal, and they stay in IU. But point being, that is another improvement. Because you see, I mean, I've seen on TV a million times prisoners say fuck you to the security guard, and they get thrown in isolation for weeks on end or whatever. And so, I hope those positive changes will continue happening, but I can't say I've been there long enough to be totally confident they will.
I'll do that. So this is actually one of the things that I learned as I was working in the prison, is that it's better to keep quiet if you don't have anything real to say than it is to try and fill the dead air with something. And Yeah, it was maybe a little intimidating, I guess, for some people. When you have, 30 or 40 of these guys looking at you, you're supposed to be facilitating a group, and you pause because you can't figure out where you want, how you want to construct the sentence to get to the point that you're trying to make. I don't know. I always thought that like they would respect the authenticity more than like, I guess, like an air of maybe competency even. If you're just like talking to fill air, like they can sense that that's fake.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But if you take a minute and you're just like, you just pause, and what's fascinating is that every single time I had to pause, nobody complained about it. It was all like they were cool with it. Not sure where I was going with that.
One thing they teach us at my job is not to share too much personal information.
Yes.
For a number of reasons. And they say, don't try to just fill dead air, because you're going to just end up telling some story from your life, and pretty soon the kid knows where your children go to high school.
That's even worse. That's even worse than,
So that's...
That just sounded like an idiot, I guess.
And I agree that they appreciate authenticity a lot. So...
Yeah, I had the feeling, because I was coming in there like, I don't have a history of substance abuse. I've never spent time in prison. I'm, by all accounts, like I got described as like a Leave It to Beaver vibe on more than one occasion while I was in there. And so thinking about it, before I even set foot on the facility the first time, I'm like, there's no way. Like, if I try to pretend to be anything that I'm not, like, I'm just gonna get eaten alive. But at least if I'm just like, this is who I am, then like, even if they do end up eating me alive, I'm like okay with that, because there's no like there's a sense of full accountability in that sense with it. So that is something I do want to ask you. I learned a lot about accountability when I worked there. What is in your estimation, what is the emphasis that's put on accountability, and how is it framed for them to try and get a handle on it?
So I think the first thing that comes to mind is we're told, if we're asking the youth to do something, say please and thank you. Because we expect the youth to do that with us, we should do that with them. I think of that as accountability, at least. If we mess up, we should apologize to the youth, because whether the youth know it or not, we are their role models. Whether they like it or not, we are their role models. What they see in us, they're going to do. So if one of the youth asks me for his phone call, and 3 hours later I realize I haven't given his phone call, I'll go up to him and say, hey man, I'm so sorry. I was supposed to give you a phone call, whatever else happened. I can dial the number for you now if you like. And I think that's really important. When they see us taking that kind of accountability, they're going to end up doing the same thing. Another piece of it, I feel like this fits in with accountability, maybe not, but it's a consistency piece of it. If you come in one day and you're a total hard ass, and then the next day you come in and you're not enforcing the same rules, maybe you're letting kids do something this day that you yelled at another kid for the day before, that doesn't work. The one thing
Yeah,
they do
and
tell us
if you think they're not going to notice,
they notice.
oh, they notice everything.
Oh, they notice everything. And part of that is the survival mode.
Mm.
Part of that is, they are kids, and they're a lot smarter than we give them credit for. They're a lot smarter than they might seem at first. I mean, the phrase I've come to learn is they get referred to as 30-second kids in a 1-second world, meaning the things that, in my mind, those functions that I can do quickly in 1 second takes these kids 30 seconds to do. Which means the thing that takes me a minute and a half to process is going to take them like 10 minutes, right?
Mm.
And yet it still gets processed, even if it doesn't happen in the moment. So you might not realize it, but they're noticing everything. So the one thing they do tell us is that when you very first come in, maybe be a little more on the tough side and then lighten up. But if you come in and you're a total softie and you're letting them do whatever they want, it's going to be a lot harder to gain that authority afterwards. They say the things you're willing to put up with on the first day, you better be willing to put up with a year from now, because it's not going to change.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. So what is the program's approach to holding the youth accountable? Like how do you hold them accountable for their behavior?
Well, it's going to depend in large part on what the behavior is. Because, if they're teenagers, they get up and jump on the table. And we say, hey, get down. And they get down, and it's thank you. And that's the end of it. You know what I mean? If it's something like that that's being repeated over and over, what we end up doing is we call a code, and campus operations show up. Depending on what it is, of course. But campus operations will talk with them, again, more kind of like the preschoolers, like trying to teach them that this effect, well, I mean, first of all, kid, if you fall and hit your head on that concrete floor, you're not going to be having fun anymore.
Yeah.
But also, show them how it affects other people, because they are, they don't always like the staff, but they have friends there in the unit. And anything they do affects the wider unit. But they don't necessarily know that, especially not in the moment if they're a 30-second kid.
Right.
And so it's really about teaching them that side of things. If it's more serious things, I can't say I really know for sure. I mean, as long as I've been there, we haven't found any contraband on the unit. Or anything like that. I
mean, it's there. But it's there, like without a doubt.
It's there. I mean, and
it's just a matter of like frequency and like how much is there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And what is it? 'Cause, I mean, if they bring a pencil if they can use a pencil in the day room, but if they bring it into their room, suddenly it's contraband.
Right.
But it's a pencil. It's not that big a deal. I mean, it is a big deal when they try to use it as a shank, but pencils we give them are like that big. So, but there are some units where they let them take pencils in their room, and that's not contraband. So there's a whole wide range. And so you're right, there's contraband. But yeah, so I guess I'm not totally sure about that one. One thing I see a lot is they act out in school. The teachers are great. The teachers in our school, well, I've only met a few of them, but they're amazing.
Well, I think you kind of have to be to want to take that on. Yeah,
absolutely, yeah. So we're told that because we have to be in the classroom as well, they have to have some of the unit staff. But we're told that is the teacher's classroom, and it should remain as such unless we have to step in. And I see the teachers doing the same thing that I saw when I was in high school and kids were talking. I mean, I'm sure you've seen it in high school. Kids are talking, and the teacher, tells them to quiet down and talks about they're disrupting the classroom, they're disrupting the other students' learning, things like that. And it's not that much different on the unit because they do care about each other. I mean, if it's a staff they've built good rapport with, they care about the staff as well. But yeah,
What do you think? What do you think that is? So you said they care about each other on the unit.
Well, not always, but
so I mean, is there a general sense of camaraderie between them?
kind of. I mean, there's an us versus them mentality. That is there. Sense of camaraderie. So we had one kid on the unit who recently went to his permanent unit, and everyone, including the staff, actually, I should say this is one thing where the staff, didn't like the way they handled this at all. Some of the staff, but no one liked this kid. And I'm not justifying any of their actions, but it was with good reason. He was a pain. And the other youth picked on him. But even in those kind of instances, I still think there is kind of an us versus them mentality where when push comes to shove, they're the youth and we're the staff, and that's what it is at the end of the day. So camaraderie is maybe too nice to use as a blanket statement.
Yeah.
But they do. They have friends there. They're friendly with each other most of the time, at least on my unit. You get a few kind of lone wolves, but there is a sense of camaraderie. It's just not necessarily always there, I suppose.
And I had it. So side note, I mean, I like doing the late night podcasts, but I am tired by the end of the day. So yeah, it's like if I probably shouldn't do the heavier like things that I'm at. I should focus more on like the comedy podcast. I think at the end of the night kind of thing. That would be better because I have like real questions that I want to talk to you about. But the brain's not cooperating so much. I mean, the alcohol doesn't help all that much, but Anyway, I mean, it's not like any other job I think you'll ever work.
No.
It's so alien in so many ways.
Yeah.
And even though it was like one of the most frustrating jobs I've ever had, because like they're just with the staff specifically, like there was so much, backstabbing and, like, listen, the reason I lost my job was because of the other staff, right? That's kind of all I'll say about it, but I've never had a job that I've enjoyed, that I've gotten like a sense of fulfillment out of, and anywhere near as close, to the way that was. I think something about like working with the same group of guys for an extended period of time, like you really get to build relationships with people, and you really get to see the impact that you specifically have through all the bullshit, because there's a bunch of bullshit.
Oh yeah.
But when I had a guy that we I think about this as like one of the most embarrassing moments that I've ever had, in my professional career. But I was running a group, and I kind of said something that I shouldn't have. Like I took it a step too far. And I could tell, like, as soon as I said it, that, he was not ready to hear that.
Yeah.
And I could feel it as I was saying it, but I pushed through it anyway, right? So it was like all on me. and he gets up and he storms out of the group and just like doesn't talk to anybody for the rest of the day. And I'm kind of like, yeah, I can't even fault him for that, because I went it was just a step too far on on my part. So I actually kind of stood up for him when, because you're not supposed to leave group, right? You're not supposed to do that. And so they were like, you need to give him, my supervisor was talking to me, and she was like, you need to give him some accountability for that, because he is not supposed to just get up and leave. I'm like, listen, I overstepped.
Yeah.
And what he chose to do was remove himself from the situation rather than cause a scene and maybe even have the facility throw a code because of him.
Right.
So if you want to give him an accountability for it, then you're going to have to do it. But I'm not going to be able to deliver that with any kind of conviction, because actually I'm kind of proud of him right now.
Yeah.
And like, she didn't like that. She did not like the insubordination.
Right.
But that's what it was. And like, I knew I wasn't going to be able to give the accountability to him, right? Because that's what we called our punishments, right? Was we were trying to move from like the I forget the word for it, but like the more punishment style to the accountability, like the cognitive, like try and get the things to match up so you build the skill that you need to not recommit. But but it doesn't matter. She didn't like it.
Well, walking away from a situation that makes you mad is a very good skill to have.
Absolutely.
So, and one that at least the youth in my facility don't have most of the time.
And so the next day, and this is really like the best part of the story, is like he comes up to me and he's like, listen, I'm sorry. Like, you struck a nerve with me and I acted out and I just had to remove myself from the situation. But I thought about it, and I thought about it a lot. And actually, no, you were right. Like, you were on the money. And I just didn't want to see it. And from that day on, there was a change in him.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's like those, like, you don't get that. I've never had that. Like, I worked in mental health and substance abuse for over 3 years now. And it was literally only in the prison where I had those types of experiences, where I really felt fulfilled in what I was doing and how I was working with these people. So, yeah, it's just a shame that like the political landscape is just so. It's just a quagmire of incompetence and.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't want to like put you off, because that's just where I was, you know. But it sounds like if you guys are presenting a united front, that's a really good sign. That's a really good sign. So, because
and that's not true on some of the units, from what I've heard, which is very unfortunate.
Because they immediately pick up on that too. Like, there's no way to get around it.
Well, they'll play stuff against each other all the time.
All the time.
Yeah. Find anything they can use against you, and sometimes that thing is the other staff.
Yep. You know, we had staff who didn't want to give out the accountabilities. So, like, imagine having 6 clinicians who are working on a unit, and 3 of them, you know, want to give out these accountabilities, and 3 of them are like, no, I don't think they should ever be held accountable for their behaviors. What the fuck do you do with that? And our supervisor is just like, you know, I don't know.
Yeah.
Just that place was wild. That place was wild.
Sounds like it.
All right. What else? Where are we on time? We started at 11. So I typically run, like, I shoot for 90 minutes.
Okay.
Just generally. But I leave a 2-hour time frame for, like, breaks and technical difficulties and things to get started or whatever. So I guess I'll pause here.
Well, you had mentioned in your Reddit post interested in talking about Buddhism as well.
Oh, you beat me to it.
Yeah.
So I was going to say, basically what you said. So did I say that in the post?
Yeah.
I don't remember which post it was. I think I've done like 3 different ones, so it's hard to keep track.
List of topics you said you'd be interested in discussing. That was one of them.
What do we want to say here?
What is your interest in Buddhism?
I think as a practice, I'm interested in it. Okay, I feel like that's weird with the mic there. Anyway. As a practice. I'm interested. Why am I interested in Buddhism? Like, what's my interest in Buddhism? My interest in Buddhism is... Oh my God, there's so many reasons. Goodness. Okay. That's part of the problem. That's why I don't have an immediate answer. My interest in Buddhism is, I think it comes off as like the cool, hip religion.
Oh, yeah.
And so I was raised in almost a religious household. My parents belonged to goodness, I couldn't even tell you, but some branch of Christianity. One of the not crazy ones, but one of the not well-known ones.
Right.
At least from what I could tell. Known as Silent Unity.
Right.
And meh. Like, it was fine. I hated going to church because I didn't want to get up. I didn't want to get out of bed to go to church. I was so mad the entire time I was ever at church or Sunday school. And so I was like, nah. Just on that, just like on that basis alone, I'm not in for this religious thing. But I do remember that they took a more metaphysical approach to the Bible. And so it ran more like a self-help church than anything else, which I think is kind of funny.
When you say more metaphysical, what do you mean?
I mean, the focus was on... So, like, if you're gonna, like, have an... Try and understand the Bible from, like, a literal sense, right? That's one level of analysis. So you're going to analyze it just at, like, the literal sense. It's true literally. A more metaphysical sense from that point is basically anything that uses the Bible as a starting point in an attempt to extract out essentially universal truths that you can internalize and have basically like be your guiding principles.
So that, based on the way you describe it, at least, it's a lot more common than you might think. Just outside of the United States, the idea of interpreting the Bible totally literally is very new.
Hmm.
Started in the mid 1800s. It's called biblical literalism.
Oh, that's interesting.
Oh, I was a religious studies major, by the way.
Oh, were you?
I was, yeah.
Oh,
So
my wife minored in religious studies. So,
okay, yeah. So one of my biggest interests was early Christianity. But yeah, mid 1800s and spread outside of the United States some, but not really outside of Protestantism at all. So the Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox churches usually do not take that literalist approach to it. And those make up the largest, well, Catholic Church is the largest church. The second largest, I believe, is the Church of England, which is the Anglican Church.
Okay.
And then Eastern Orthodox would be third. But yeah, it's really only within Protestant churches. And then some others, like the Mormons, I believe, interpret it literally. But I'm not trying to be rude, but I typically just refer to Mormonism as Protestants with extra steps. Because Joseph Smith was very, you can tell he's very influenced by the Protestants. But the point is that more metaphysical approach is a lot more common than a lot of Americans realize, at least. More common than I knew before I went to the university.
Yeah, I think I've just been like so incredibly bored with the Judeo-Christian religions. Purely because of my experiences with Sunday school and just how deeply I resented having to go to church on one of my only days off because I hated school. I didn't want to go because I didn't want to get up. It was really the same fucking thing. I never wanted to get out of bed. Yep. It still sucks, but it's I at least want to get out of bed now. So it's, it's different. But
yeah,
I love sleeping in though. I do love sleeping in.
And like I don't know you well enough to say like necessarily if this is true or not, but I suspect that if there was something you got out of going to church, it would make it a lot easier to get up out of bed on Sunday mornings.
Yes. Now, so, for sure. Now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
but that's the thing. Like that's actually how I lead my life. It's like I don't do things based on what they're going to accomplish for me in the future. I do things based on like, am I going to do this? Like, am I actually going to get out of bed? Am I actually going to like be able to keep doing this? And if the answer is no, I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that then because that's dumb. I don't care where it's going to lead me. No, I know I'm not going to do it. So, yeah. And it takes, I think, a little bit of discipline to be able to sit with yourself long enough and have an honest response like that to something. Because I think we make flippant responses to things almost as our default.
Yeah.
And so, especially like for me, like I was also undiagnosed ADHD.
Yeah.
until in my 30s. I'm like, oh. And then I got medicated. I'm like, oh, this everything makes sense now.
Yeah. Yep.
It still sucks.
I know how that goes.
But it's like, oh, okay. This whole everything. I understand what's happening.
Yeah.
So I'm just not going to do it though. I'm not, if I'm not going to do something, then like, why am I going to force myself to do it when there are plenty of other things that I could be doing that I want to be doing?
Yeah.
So I guess that's me in a nutshell, but that doesn't answer your question. Okay. I recognize that it doesn't actually fully answer your question.
Yeah.
It gives you an idea though. Because I think a lot of what I articulated aligns with Buddhist teachings. And I think that's really what drew me to Buddhism itself because I had like internalized a lot of these things naturally. And it was actually my wife who, religious study minor. So she knew about stuff, and I'm telling her about like, this is how I view the world. This is my approach to things. This is what I feel. And this is how I act. And she's like, you should look into Buddhism because basically what you described is the Buddhist philosophy. And I'm like, okay. And I didn't for like 3 years. Yeah. But fair enough. It sort of found me too, which I think was pretty cool. I don't know what else I want to say about it. I don't like go to a temple or a church, or I don't belong to anything. I just feel I have a good sense for the teaching itself. And I already naturally live my life. So it's more like, like if religion is a glove, it's just like the Buddhist glove was like my size, so I just picked it up and put it on. It's not like I thought about it too much. But I like that, even that one quote that gets circulated all the time that about Buddhism, like, believe nothing, no matter who has said it, not even if I have said it, if it doesn't agree with your own common sense. So it's like, obviously that's where you start from. Yeah. It's like, consider everything for you. You have these faculties of attention, intelligence. And so why are you going to defer your, why are you going to defer that to somebody else to tell you what it is, right? You still have to use those faculties to determine if this person is valid or not. So why not just use it on the thing? Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that, I've heard that pretty much same story quite a lot from people. I think it's something that happens, which is cool. And especially as Buddhism spreads more and more in the West, I think a lot of people will find that.
It's just like, intuitively, there's an intuitive sense. And that's the thing that Buddhism is pointing to. I don't know that I've ever actually talked to anybody else about this out loud. Because most of the people that I talk to, like, some people, just, I haven't talked to anybody who even understands, even just like the basics of Buddhism. Let alone.
I'm on the West Coast, and on the West Coast, Buddhism is the second largest religion after Christianity.
Oh, wow.
Because of, primarily because of immigration from East Asia, and then in recent decades, more and more white Americans, as well as others, African Americans and other populations, have been converting to Buddhism, and so it has grown to become the second largest religion in this part of the country. And so it's not uncommon to run into someone. One of my coworkers at one of our trainings mentioned that he was Buddhist. I was like, oh, I didn't know that. Me too. So it's probably a lot more common around here for that to happen. Are there any temples near you?
No. It's unfortunate.
Yeah.
There's looked
tons of them in Oregon.
So what is it about Buddhism for you?
Long story. Long story short, though, one of the things that the Buddha said, because here's my religious studies mind kicking in. Buddha lived in India about 2,500 years ago.
Mm.
At the time, so what is now known as Hinduism was the dominant religion, but the British actually made up the term Hinduism, so it was called something different back then. And of course, 2,500 years ago, it looked very different. Religions change over time. I mean, Buddhism in the beginning was significantly different than it is now. That's just the natural way of things. But anyway, at the time, it was really, there would be these religious teachers, and a number of disciples would coalesce around them and learn from them and eventually become teachers themselves. And so you had a lot of people teaching a lot of very different things. There was, and still to this day, is no organization of Hinduism. In fact, in India, most Hindu temples are totally independent. And so Buddha was one teacher amongst many. And he and his followers had some enemies of other religious persuasions, including Jainism, which still exists today. But one thing that the Buddha said according to the sutras, a group of followers of another religious sect came to him and basically asked, why would we believe you over other teachers? And Buddha said, try it. Do it. Try the teachings. And if it helps, then you know it's true. And if it doesn't, do something else. And so that's what I did. And it made my life better. And so I've kept going with it.
So in what way have the teachings made your life better?
I was in a period of very, very severe mental health issues. Untreated ADHD, as we've mentioned. I was having really bad anxiety and full psychotic break. And I learned about Buddhism a lot in college prior to this. And it was during that time that I kind of started being interested in practicing Buddhism. And for one thing, I credit a large part of my mental health recovery with that. It has made me a happier person. It has made me more compassionate. But more than anything else, so I'm sure you're familiar with the samsara and nirvana.
Yes.
And
those two, I do want to make a point that I don't know the terminology, because I've never studied it, but I'm aware. I would like to think I'm aware of at least the important ones. So yeah, definitely samsara and definitely
of course
nirvana.
Is the cycle of reincarnation, and nirvana is the world of bliss where you go after you break the cycle of reincarnation. Well, the teaching in Buddhism is that samsara is nirvana, and there's not the slightest difference between the two.
Which makes sense. It does. It doesn't make sense if you don't understand, but it does make sense.
And there's one, I don't remember his name, but a Chinese Buddhist teacher who I think explained it perfectly, because it's all about the way we perceive things, right? The exact same reality is coming to you, but it's filtered through your senses, through your preconceptions and everything. And what you experience is samsara, when in reality, all that exists is the ultimate reality of nirvana, right? Yes. So this one Buddhist teacher, he said, you'll find a lot of Buddhist commentaries are set up as a question and an answer. And the question was, if samsara is nirvana, but we are in samsara trying to break out and go to nirvana, then what is the gate between the two, right? And his answer was your eyes. Because what comes, what comes in basically is nirvana, is the ultimate reality.
Dude, that's so good.
Exactly.
It's so good.
So what happened was I was speaking to where I used to live, the priest of a temple, and it's still the temple that I go to because it's not too far, and there's none in the city where I live now. But I was telling him about my mental health, and I basically asked, is this the result of some bad karma from a past life? Expecting the answer to be, yeah, it must be. Bad karma causes bad things to happen. And I asked the same question to a number of different teachers, and
This is
he
fascinating to
was
me.
the only
I want to make
one.
a point about it after you finish, but
Yeah, he was the only one who gave me a different answer. He said, maybe it's negative karma from a past life. Who am I to say? But he said, maybe it's actually a result of good karma. So that this is what pushes you down the path of Buddhism and ultimately
to
results
your
in
liberation.
your
Yeah.
enlightenment. Then it is the best karma out there. And
That's a
those
good
two
answer.
ideas, that and the samsara nirvana thing,
Mm.
he said that, well, it was over email, but I read that and I was like, oh. And then, I don't know, 6 months later, it actually clicked in my mind what that all means. Because if samsara and nirvana is nothing more than a change of perspective, then I can do that same change of perspective with my mental illness and see it as a good thing. And you know what? That's when my symptoms stopped happening for the most part. I'm no longer on anxiety medication. I don't need it.
That's so awesome, man.
I'm no longer on antipsychotics. I don't need them.
What?
And that is rare.
That's unheard of, is what that is.
They diagnosed me with schizophrenia, but now it's gone. And I thought, well, guess I keep doing this. You know what I mean? So if you want something more specific, is that just that idea of changing perspective and how powerful that is what really drew me in.
Well, I mean, you I need a minute. Because there's a lot that's happening there. I mean, to see real results, I think is rare. But to see such monumental shifts in, I mean, I maybe I'm overstepping, but to see such monumental shifts in the quality of your own life, right? I don't even know, like, how often does that happen? Because that's really what people go to religion for. How often do they
it definitely
actually
happens.
find it?
I mean, I've seen it happen in other people, but I've also seen it fall flat so many times. You know what I mean?
Right, for sure.
And this is not the first time I've converted religions either. I was raised Christian as well. In college, I became a member of the Baha'i religion, which most people haven't even heard of.
I have not.
Not, I don't want to, oh my God, I just kicked my cat under the table. He's fine. It just surprised me. But I don't want to sit here and like talk bad about other people's religions. But I joined this religion and turns out the only thing I ever did was try to convert other people. And that was no good. I mean, the day I found myself walking through the neighborhood, knocking on people's doors, I was like, this is not what I signed up for. And so, and I kind of found that it was the same issue I had with Christianity, is there was very little emphasis whatsoever on personal spiritual development.
Yes.
And of course, many different flavors of Christianity, but the one I was raised with was, well, you're saved. Now go out and make sure everyone else is saved.
Oh, God.
I've been told, I don't know how many times I was told, take out your phone right now and call your friends and tell them about Jesus.
Oh.
Kind of thing. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Goodness.
And I was like, no. And they're like, no, take out your phone right now. Your friends might die before you can tell them about Jesus unless you do it right now. And
oh, my God. How old were you?
Teenage, high school, probably. Middle school, maybe.
Still,
yeah. So it's I'm not here to try to convince anyone to join Buddhism, but what I will say is it feels to me as if religion in America doesn't have that spiritual aspect to it most of the time. And that's what really helped me. So people think of it, you just like go to church on Sunday, it's like an obligation. And if all it is an obligation, you're not going to get anything out of it.
Right. So, thinking about how to phrase this, because I took a pretty non-traditional route to understanding Buddhism. So, in my mind, okay, all right. Goodness. I don't know how other people just talk. I don't get it. I do not get how other people just say stuff. How do you do that? How do you like, because the whole thing is just a goddamn quagmire. And I'm supposed to just like forge through it? No.
That's my ADHD life.
No. Like, how much damage could I do? How much damage could I cause?
Right.
And I'm supposed to be able to do that on... It's insane. No, there's something else. There's... So my channel mostly is reactions. I think this is the 5th, maybe 6th podcast overall. So I don't have a whole lot of those. Most of the I've done, I think, like 250 reaction videos or something to this point. And what's funny is that actually I didn't even know that I could pause the recordings until about like 6 months ago.
Yeah.
Like, so the first like 6 months, I'm legitimately, because the thing that's interesting about reaction videos that I don't think I realized is that they're kind of they're one and done. Like, you can't react to a song that you've already heard.
Right.
And so that puts a specific type of pressure on you. It's low stakes, but at the same time, it's not like a lot of other, like, movies. You can reshoot scenes. Like, you can't go back and reshoot a reaction video.
Yeah.
With any kind of like authenticity to it. So having to like not even being able to pause and having to articulate myself on the spot was really good for me. But I still don't understand how the fuck you get through that shit. Like, I don't get it.
Yeah.
I don't even remember the question now. I just remember like the... Because am I the only one who's like, if you say the wrong shit, you could really fuck some shit up?
Well, especially on social media.
Anyway.
I don't remember, what was I saying? I don't remember either.
Buddhism.
Something like that.
I was going to ask you a question, but formulating the question properly was much more intense than I thought it was going to be. Uh,
Oh, you know what we're talking about? We were talking about like spirituality and the spiritual aspects of religion. I said that I think that's missing from a lot of American religion. The last thing I remember.
um, you came to Buddhism in a non-traditional. Oh yes, I did say that.
Oh yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
did.
Yep.
I did say that.
Yep.
Slurkins, thank you. Keep me honest.
Yeah.
Uh, okay, I guess the source of the rift there was I was torn between whether to divulge more of my understanding of Buddhism or to continue through the line of inquiry that I was previously on. But I don't remember the previous line of inquiry now, so I think it's just really just the one thing, which is me telling you a little bit more about what I know about Buddhism. Most of what I learned about Buddhism, I learned from one man by the name of Alan Watts. And I've never said that out loud before in quite that way, but it is true.
Yep.
Are you familiar?
Kind of. I mean, one thing I'll tell you right off the bat is he doesn't have the best grasp on what Buddhism is, but that's mostly by virtue of the fact that he was writing in, what, the 70s, 60s, 70s.
So why do you think he didn't have a good grasp on what Buddhism was or is?
Because it happened several decades ago.
So he didn't have a good grasp on what Buddhism is now? What is Buddhism?
No. I mean, Westerners didn't understand it like they do now, and a lot of people still don't understand it well. But there's just a lot of misunderstandings that floated around. Now that said, I'm not terribly familiar with Alan Watts. Talked about him a bit in college, so I couldn't.
So I've listened to.
One thing I will say is he was really into Zen Buddhism.
Yes.
And
yes,
nothing wrong with Zen Buddhism, nothing against that whatsoever. But people really equate Zen Buddhism with Buddhism as a whole without realizing that Zen is one small sect of Buddhism.
Yeah. So I'm hold myself accountable here. I'm guilty of that.
Everyone is. I was for a long time too.
But I don't see necessarily the point of learning anything beyond Zen itself. Right? Because understanding Zen means understanding. And that's it. So more concepts aren't going to help you at that point.
No. Yeah. I think you're right. If Zen is the best path for you. You see what I'm saying?
Yes, absolutely.
And for a lot of Westerners, it seems like it is. Now, for me, I couldn't sit and meditate for 10 minutes to save my life, let alone hours and hours like some people do. So I don't meditate ever. It's not part of.
It's funny.
Yeah.
Actually, that's not true. What I do, I do micro meditations. So 15 to 17 seconds.
Yeah.
Really. I find is pretty much all I need.
Yeah. And you don't even have to sit to meditate. They call it just sitting. In fact, it's funny because I've been to Zen temples in America and they'll sit you down and they'll teach you how to meditate. But if you go to a Zen temple in Japan and you say, hey, I want to learn to meditate, they'll point to the cushion and say, sit. Because that's what you're supposed to do. No, I know. But you can do it if you're walking down the street.
Yeah.
You can just walk. If you're chopping carrots for your stew, just chop carrots.
Yeah. It's not an activity. It's a state of being.
It is, and it's a state of being that I just can't get myself into. So the point that I'm
I would say that you probably do. You just don't think about it that way.
Yes, absolutely. So according to Buddhism, there are 84,000. Sometimes we say 84,000 teachings or 84,000 Dharma gates, and not a literal number. It just means like
just
a lot, right?
A fuck ton. Yeah.
And Dharma is the Buddhist teachings, right? So Dharma gates would be different ways through the Buddhist teaching that are represented by a large amount of schools of Buddhism, right? So just in Japan, because I was when it's studying Buddhism in at the university, I mostly focused on Japanese Buddhism.
Hmm.
You've got Zen, you got Nichiren, Jodo Shinshu, Shingon, Tendai, Kigon, the three others that I can't remember the name of off the top of my head. And that's just in Japan alone. If you go to China, there's other schools of Buddhism. Tibet, we talk about Tibetan Buddhism. Well, there's about 6 or 7 schools of Tibetan Buddhism.
Right.
And so when going back to what I said, if all you know is Zen, that's all right if Zen is the right path for you, but it might not necessarily be. I mean, it could be, and that's great. If that's the first thing you encounter, and that's the right path for you, that's really wonderful.
It's not even, for me, it wasn't even that. It was like I encountered reality first.
Mm-hmm.
And then Zen was the thing that explained it. I'm like, oh, okay, that's what's happening here.
Yeah.
And it was like, that's good enough for me. I don't need because I don't look to it's not, because it's so immediate. It's right here.
It is.
You don't need concepts for this.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And that's great. Like, and go ahead.
It's just like, I don't even know what point I'm trying to make right now.
Yeah.
Because like I said, I don't talk about it very much. It doesn't come out all that much.
Yeah. Me personally, I love the concepts. I could do concepts all day. Turns out I'm on the opposite spectrum, so maybe that's not totally surprising. But
it's not that I have anything against the concepts.
Right. Yeah.
It's just if I'm actually really what I'm fascinated by is like Hinduism, like the it's absolutely insane. Like it's so insane. The mythology, the lore, Yeah.
Hinduism is a fun one.
But in terms of like seeking a religion for spiritual, whatever,
fulfillment, maybe, yeah,
fulfillment. I found it. I'm good.
Yeah.
And like I don't have to do anything for it.
Yeah.
It's perfect for me.
Yeah.
Definitely don't have to get out of the fucking bed. But yeah, I'm definitely guilty of like when I refer to Buddhism, I'm usually referring to Zen, even though really I'm referring to the quintessential pointing of all of the teachings. But that's neither here nor there.
Well, it's the school of Buddhism that I follow gets accused a lot of being the quote unquote Christian Buddhism. And I think part of the reason is that if you look at it from the outside, it looks significantly more like Christianity than Zen Buddhism does.
Which isn't a bad thing, man.
Which isn't a bad thing. But people look at it and try to like remove it from the rest, like wider Buddhism, I guess. And then it does look very much like Christianity.
Okay, people are weird.
Well, and what happened was
especially if they call themselves Buddhists, but whatever.
Right. But in the early days of missionary work into Japan by Christians, they saw the school of Buddhism was called Jodo Shinshu. They saw it as like an in to spread Christianity because it's to them the most similar to Christianity, and maybe it is more similar than other schools. I don't know. But it didn't work, so it can't be that similar, I guess. But they really, perpetuated the idea that it's like the quote-unquote Christian Buddhism. And then you get to the 1800s with the Orientalists, if you're familiar with the term, who Westerners who studied East Asian culture.
Okay.
They don't use the term Orientalist anymore, but that was in the 1800s. That's what they were called.
Okay.
And they basically did the same thing, presented it as the Christian version of Buddhism, and it's just not. So, but when people have that image of like the monk seated in a meditation pose, that's not what they see when they see Jodo Shinshu. And again, it's fine. It's fine that people equate Zen and Buddhism. It's not like it's something to get mad or offended over, of course. But
Yeah.
I just tend to explain that a lot because it's not always what you expect. And if you go to
No, and I think it's a worthwhile distinction to
it
make.
is, yeah.
So, because again, like I said, I'm guilty of it all the. I'm real bad about it. I
I
legitimately should just start telling people like I practice Zen when they ask me.
Yeah.
Because that's really what it is. It's not even that I'm a Buddhist. It's just I practice Zen. That's it.
Yeah.
It's a good point. Slitherkin says like mindfulness. Yeah, I think so. Pretty much. Bandmade fan.
Well, then you can always ask the question, what kind of mindfulness are you practicing? But
yeah.
yeah.
Mind is always full of something.
Zen mindfulness is what has become popular in the West, especially in like therapy and things like that. It comes from Zen mindfulness. So
you think so?
To answer the question, yeah, that's probably what you're thinking of.
Yes, actually, yeah.
Yeah.
You're right. It's not what I think of as mindfulness. I don't like the term mindfulness all that much.
Why? I'm curious why.
Because what is a mirror full of?
Glass.
Yes. Oh, yes. Very good. Very good. I don't like the term mindfulness because it's still what is your mind full of?
Yeah.
What is it full of? It can be full of anything. I think mindlessness for me, I think is a little bit closer to the mark.
Yeah, I can see why.
But I understand what people mean when they say mindfulness.
Right.
Yeah.
But it gets back to that idea like before about the gate between samsara and nirvana is your eyes.
Oh,
when you empty your mind, and this is basically the goal of Zen Buddhism, when you empty your mind of all
concepts.
If you can make your mind stop working, then the true ultimate reality is going to come in and it's not going to be filtered through anything. And suddenly you've perceived nirvana. And then there you are. You know what I mean? So I can see the mindlessness. Yeah.
Always chattering.
One Tibetan Buddhist monk came up with this term, but it's become pretty common, called as the monkey mind.
Yes.
You have to calm the monkey mind. Or I think he called it taming the monkey mind. He wrote a book. I haven't read it, but I'm told it's a very good book.
I'm told that they're all basically the same.
All what?
All Zen books, Buddhist books.
Oh, yeah.
But they're just told from innumerable perspectives. So it goes back to the same thing. It's like Zen is fine if it's fine for you.
The 84,000 Dharma gates.
Yep.
Because the idea is that the truth is inexpressible.
Yes.
You can't speak it in words. You have to get there and experience it for yourself. So any Buddhist teaching in words, which is how they're all written down, is called compassionate means. And it's not the truth itself. It's just pointing you toward the truth. And anything that gets you closer to the truth is, from our perspective, I guess, as unenlightened beings, could be said to be true. Even if it's a lie, it gets you closer to enlightenment. That's what you want.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I think that's one thing that Buddhism has over a lot of the other, religions. And it's that it's aware of its own limitations.
Mm-hmm.
And so it really does a lot of really a lot of Zen is taught through stories and dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not immediately obvious as to as to why it's profound. And that's the point.
Yeah.
So I think with a lot of the, specifically like the Western religions, it's a lot of, I tell you, this is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
With Buddhism, and for me, Zen specifically, it's like,
yeah. Yeah, it's the finger pointing at the moon. Have you heard that? Heard that analogy?
Remind me? I'm not sure, actually.
So if the moon is the truth, then the Buddhist teaching is a finger pointing at the moon.
Yes.
Leads you to. And once you get there, you forget the finger. Because if you hold on to those teachings...
Well, actually, it's the same thing as like confusing the map for the territory, right? Mm-hmm. We have a similar idiom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. And I would say, I don't know if you know much about Taoism, but it's very similar in Taoism. You know much about Taoism?
I know a little bit. I actually have a copy of the Tao Te Ching, and I've read it a couple of times.
So if you open up the Tao Te Ching, the first thing you see is the way that can be spoken is not the eternal and unchanging way.
Yes. Which is really all you need to know about anything ever. You can just close it at that point.
Yeah.
If you really get it. But
but that's pretty much universally thought to be why Buddhism takes the same stance, is that it was an influence from Taoism. Which, coming from a Buddhist perspective, isn't even a problem, because I shouldn't say new teachings, I guess. I mean, it's more nuanced than that. But if it's taking influence from outside sources, that's all right, because the teaching is that the Buddha is always with us, omnipresent, teaching and guiding us. Kind of a side note. But Taoism and Buddhism influenced each other a lot, especially Zen Buddhism, because Zen Buddhism actually started in China, called JON in Chinese.
Yes.
But lots of influence.
It's interesting because there's some of this stuff I'm aware of, and so it's like you're talking and I'm like, I've never heard this before, and then all of a sudden there's a chunk that, oh yeah, I know that. It's cool.
Yeah. I love that first quote from the Tao Te Ching: "The way that can be spoken of is not the eternal and unchanging way." I think the really fun part about it is that the word, because it's in ancient Chinese, the word for way, which is also Tao, so you can say the Tao that can be spoken of is not the eternal and unchanging Tao. And to speak is the same word. To speak is Tao.
So the speech that can be spoken is not the eternal speech.
No, not really, because it's from context we know it's the Tao is like kind of this metaphysical concept.
Well, listen. I mean, just because we don't want to take the thing at face value and then become missionaries and martyrs for the literal interpretation of the thing, doesn't mean that like a literal interpretation can't be insightful.
Right. Yeah. But it's I think the more perhaps if you want to get an even more literal way, because it's the way that can be spoken of, but way and spoken is the same word. Way is in path, like the way you go, right?
Yeah.
So it's like the path that you can go down is not the eternal and unchanging path. Talking about following the way that you can follow is not the eternal and unchanging way. All those are like perfectly good translations of that first verse there. And I think that's super interesting.
I you know, because I read the Bhagavad Gita as well, and
Mm-hmm.
I felt like these things, they just say the same thing, and really it's like, God, it's been a while since I read the Bhagavad Gita, but
Yeah.
um, it was all like the same level of incomprehensibility to me
Mm-hmm.
at the time. Uh, no matter what was said, but
Mm-hmm.
I still think about it all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I mean, I don't put a whole lot of time into learning scriptures or texts or
Mm-hmm.
like I
Yeah, I do
said,
that just for fun.
I know most of what I know about Zen I learned from Alan Watts,
Mm-hmm.
who was a Zen practitioner. So you can learn a lot about Zen just by being around somebody who practices it.
Oh yeah.
And since there's nobody who practices it around me, like YouTube was the only other place to find it. But
Mm-hmm.
like hundreds, maybe even thousands of hours I've spent listening to lectures and
Yeah.
things like that. But not a whole lot else. Uh, at a certain point, it just became about like I liked his voice, and I don't know. I don't know. I haven't listened to any of that stuff in a while.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, these days there's a lot that is online now since COVID hit.
Mm.
People started. I mean, entire services were held over Zoom or YouTube Live that are archived online. So there's a lot of resources out there.
What do I want to ask you? I want to ask you a question.
Okay.
Zen has a fascination, I think, with koans. Is the
Yeah.
is the rest of Buddhism like that?
No.
Okay.
Koans are very specific to Zen.
Okay.
Occasionally, I mean, you'll hear some references to them in other schools of Buddhism, but no, it's pretty unique to Zen.
Mm. Um, one of the things that I heard that I and you know what, I'm just gonna say this now.
Mm.
I'm running out of gas, so this is more
Yeah,
than
no
just
worries.
like, yeah, I'm legitimately out of steam at
Mm-hmm.
this point. But um, I still have some things that I want to ask.
All right.
Uh, mm, damn it, where'd that go? I had it. It was right there. I thought it would be fine if I made the point. Hmm. So I had asked you uh, if koans were, you know, something specific to Zen, and so they don't
Mm-hmm.
really present in other areas of Buddhism. How
Okay.
is it? How do you? What is the pointings? What are the pointings like?
Pointings, are you referring back to like the finger pointing at the moon?
Yeah.
Right, give me 1 second. This is just one example, but this, you see that?
Um. Yes.
This is the statue that takes the center place on my altar.
Okay.
Because I have in the Japanese tradition, it's very common to have a home altar, and you do practices in front of the altar. This is meant to be the Buddha, naturally. But this is not something that I should grasp onto, because this in and of itself is not ultimate reality, right?
Right.
I mean, it is in so much as everything is.
Right.
But that's kind of the point. If I take this, if I take this specifically and I hold on to this with all my strength, then all I have is a gold-plated statue, and that's not going to get me anywhere.
Yes.
But everything about this is supposed to teach you something, right? So we have, well, you know, part of the problem is I don't know all the symbology necessarily, but here on the bottom is a lotus flower. See that? Lotus flower is a very common metaphor in Buddhism, because they take so much water to grow that they typically grow out of the mud. But when they grow up out of the mud and they bloom, and it's a clean, pure, quote unquote, flower, right? And the idea is that that is what we're supposed to be doing with our minds as they come out of all the mud and bloom into an enlightened mind. Is a lotus flower going to help me in real life? No.
Right.
Other things like, well, there's all kinds of stuff like the, well, I don't, you probably can't see this when it's a little bit. The bump on top of the Buddha's head, you see in a lot of statues. That's not hair, by the way. A lot of people, myself included, for a long time, assume that's hair. But the idea is that the Buddha possesses a superior knowledge and wisdom, so there's a bump on the top of his head. He has like a big brain, which is hilarious.
That is hilarious.
Things like that. Here, give me one more second. So in Zen, koans are very common. In other forms of Buddhism, there are the sutras. You see? Yeah. These are said to be the words of the Buddha, but just like the koans, they are a finger pointing to the moon. I can't, you know, if I'm, okay, this one, you know, it doesn't matter, it's not like I'm going to read it to you, but there's 3 sutras all in this one book. And the second one tells a story about this king in ancient India, king and queen, and their son kill the king. I'm going to have to read it again, I guess. I think he kills the king and imprisons the queen, so his mom and dad. And the queen is there, and she prays to the Buddha, and he miraculously appears in her jail cell. But I'm not, for one thing, I'm not taking that as literal, because of, you know, the danger of grasping at the finger instead of the moon.
What do you think? What do you think about this? One of the things that I've heard that has been particularly interesting to me about Buddhism is that Buddha isn't just the person. Buddha is a title given to someone who has awakened to their Buddha nature. And so they say that all beings have the seed of Buddha within them. So in this story, if we think about it in that context, Buddha appearing before her would be her own enlightenment. I think moksha.
No, not, at least not in this case, because it's made very clear that the queen, Vaidehi is her name. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right.
No, it's okay.
I don't know if I've ever heard it pronounced out loud or just read it, but she, you know, it's made very clear that she is.
Listen, neither of us are experts, so it's fine.
Fair enough. But it's made very clear that she is not enlightened. And then the question, you know, there's a question of, if you already have your Buddha nature within you, are you not already enlightened and just don't realize it? And to that, I would say, yes, you don't realize it. That's why you're not enlightened yet, because of the whole perspective thing, right? So in that sense, I would say no, it's not just her own Buddha nature. For one thing, this story just didn't happen. I mean, it would be written in the history books if it did. You know what I mean? So there's no reason to think the Buddha just miraculously appeared in her jail cell. Where was I going with this? But the other thing you have to realize, where was I going with this? I'm sorry.
You're good.
I got lost. Well, for one thing, you know, even if we're coming at this from a purely historical academic perspective, the Buddha was a real person.
Mm-hmm.
And we know this, just like Jesus was a real person. But according to Buddhism, he became enlightened, fully enlightened, we say the Buddha because he is the founder of Buddhism, but he became a Buddha, just like everyone ultimately will, according to the teachings. In Buddhism, there's the idea of the 3 Buddha bodies, which gets a little complicated, but there's one of them is called the manifestation body, and is how a Buddha manifests in the world. Like, for example, as a human being named Shakyamuni in India. But the Buddha also manifests as the teachings themselves. So I could very accurately state that what I'm holding right now is quite literally the Buddha.
The Buddha.
But I wouldn't say that it's my own Buddha nature that I'm reading out of a book. You know what I mean?
I would.
That said, you know, there are different schools of Buddhism, and that's something that in my school of Buddhism, it's pretty heavily emphasized to realize that you are an unenlightened being. And so when we talk about Buddha nature, we say that the Buddha nature, the very common phrase is Buddha nature is Tathagata, and Tathagata is just another word for saying Buddha. Which you would hear, I mean, I'm sure you would hear, and this is not inaccurate or incorrect or anything, you would hear that and say that, well, then the Buddha is within me. I am the Buddha, right? Whereas in my school of Buddhism, it's very emphasized to see yourself and the Buddha is kind of separate. Not separate in terms of Buddha's not here and we're not kind of at one with each other, but I am an unenlightened being, and that is very far removed in status from an enlightened Buddha. So when we say the Buddha nature is Tathagata, what we're really saying is it's by the Buddha's power that we reach enlightenment, which is kind of unique compared to other schools of Buddhism.
You know, I think that's where it gets its reputation for having the Christian flair to it.
Absolutely. But you also hear what I said earlier about samsara is nirvana. Oh, because because I said the quote is Buddha nature is Tathagata. Forget exactly how the whole quote goes. Something along the lines of nirvana is Buddha nature, so that the Buddha and nirvana are equated with each other. And that happens a lot in the Buddhist teachings. Because one of the other 2 Buddha bodies is the Dharma body, which is nirvana, is ultimate reality itself. And in the teachings of my school of Buddhism, Jodo Shinshu, you see the phrase samsara is nirvana all the time.
Yeah.
And in the Japanese tradition, I don't know if you've seen this, called gasho, where you put your palms together. Your left hand represents samsara, your right hand represents nirvana coming together. Your left hand also represents yourself, and your right hand, the Buddha, coming together as one. But I think the emphasis, I guess I'd say the way I understand it, at least, is the reason we place our emphasis on the separation between ourselves as online beings and the Buddha is, how are you going to bring them together if they're not separate in the first place? You know what I mean? We need to kind of recognize where we're at now before we reach this place, and that's kind of the whole point. So it is very unique.
It is.
In Zen Buddhism, you look into your mind and you see the Buddha, we're taught to look into our mind and see foolish beings, as it's phrased. But
and it's like
there's
there's a lot of value in that for a lot of people, because
yeah.
if you Zen can be massively confusing to people who are like, what do you mean I'm already enlightened? That doesn't help me. What do you mean? Right. And so me personally I was like, I don't understand that. I didn't get it right away, but I knew that like there was something happening. So it didn't deter me. I think it actually just made me more interested in it. But
it also goes back to what you're saying, or what we were talking about the different Dharma gates and everything, how these two basically opposite perspectives both lead people toward enlightenment.
Right, toward the same destination.
Interesting, right?
Yeah.
Exactly, yeah.
It is, I mean, fascinating to see this, the duality in everything. And I know that word has been kind of like hijacked, I think. But when I use duality, I mean the sense of polarization. So what I think is particularly interesting about the idea of duality is that you have a North Pole and a South Pole, right? That represents a duality. But it's one magnet.
Yeah.
That has both of those. And I think that piece is missed when people talk about duality. Is that the whole thing goes together.
Yeah.
I don't know how I got on that, but there you go.
Yeah, I mean, the same thing when viewed from one perspective might be, well, I should say, if you're looking from one perspective, you might see two things, but then you look from another perspective and realize they're actually one.
Right.
And that's why in Buddhism, you might sometimes hear the phrase, not one, not two, because
I love that.
Ultimately, I know, I love this too. So if you think about it, people often say, everything is all one, it's all one thing. And that's, for a lot of people, again, that's a good way to think about it. But
it's so easy to turn that into just turn that into an idol, and then let that be like, it's but whatever, it's okay, it's fine.
So in Buddhism, though, what part of the idea is that thing, like categories between things, start to break down, so that one thing you'll often hear is, if you have a chair, right? Here's my chair. It's one chair, right? But then if you look, you can see it. If you look at it, these different pieces, like these, if I had, a screwdriver to unscrew everything, these would come apart.
Right.
It's my cat.
I
could take the screws out. I could take the legs off. I could take the seat off, and then it's not a chair anymore. It's just separate things, right?
Right.
But if I put it back together, those are still separate things.
Yes.
But suddenly it's one chair, right? Same thing. You actually hear this with that. Sometimes you hear the example with cats. You're looking at a cat. Where do I end and the cat begins?
I love that question.
Because I know. Because the categories between myself and others, in this case, my cat, start to break down. But if you think about it, if everything is all one, you've just created another category. Sure, you put everything into that one category, but it's still a category.
It's still a category, yeah.
You could say everything that exists is in that category, so why does it matter? Well, now you've created categories between what exists and what does not exist. And even that starts to break down in Buddhism. So that's where you hear not one, not two. And you can keep going forever because numbers never end. But I like that one. That one's cool.
Yeah, I like that one too.
Yeah.
I do think it's interesting. What's up?
I was gonna say, pretty soon I'm gonna have to log off and get ready for bed.
Yeah, me too. I guess we'll wrap up.
Okay.
I do want to make this last point though. That had a stint for, I guess, about a year and a half where I was really interested in like math and physics.
Mm.
So I took like a bunch of, I was actually in a chemistry with math concentration major for a little while there. And I didn't realize, now that I think about it, it seems pretty obvious, but any measurement that any of our scientific instruments ever take always have some element of rounding in them. No measurement has ever been completely precise. And no measurement ever will be completely precise because there are an infinite number of numbers. And so to realize that the physical world is much trickier to pin down than it seems at first glance. I think that speaks to the idea that, well, the chair is a chair as long as it's functioning as a chair.
Right, exactly.
And that's what makes it a chair. So it's
So I'll say one more thing. I know I said I was gonna log off, but in Taoism is also super interesting to me. There's the Tao Te Ching. There's another text called the Zhuangzi. So it was written by a guy named Zhuangzi.
Yeah,
I like it. I prefer it over the Tao Te Ching personally. A few parts of it where you read it and it's like reading a koan. But one thing, he asked the question, what makes a road? And keeping in mind that people in ancient China didn't drive, they walked. But he said, what makes a road? And he says, people walking on it. He says, well, actually, first, I think I'm getting the order mixed up. I think first he says, what makes something so? So meaning like, how it is, what makes it so. He says, making it so makes it so. And then he says, a road is made by people walking on it.
Yes.
And I think that's so true. I mean, if I had never seen a chair before in my life, and this is hard to imagine because we see chairs all our lives, but if I walked up to this, I'm not going to say this is a chair. I'm going to say, what the fuck is that?
Right.
I'm not going to know what to do with it. I'm not going to use it as a chair probably unless I happen to sit on it and I think, this is kind of comfy. This chair
maybe.
comfy,
I mean,
though, so
yeah,
maybe I wouldn't.
yeah. But you wouldn't know. You wouldn't have that preconceived notion. Yeah.
The preconceived notion, exactly.
Yeah.
And then if I, instead of sitting on it, if I decided to take it apart instead, then where does that leave me?
Right.
So, super interesting.
Yeah. All right, man.
All right. Yeah.
Well, that's gonna do it. I appreciate you hanging out.
Yeah. It's fun.
So definitely be willing to down to talk again. Like I said, I definitely want to like after you've had a little bit more time in the facility. Get your thoughts on that.
Cool.
But I'm always down to talk about like the Buddhist stuff too. So
that'd be awesome.
Yeah.
All right.
Have a good night, dude.
All right. You too.
All right. Take care.
You too.